A Lion's Lament, A Land of the Lions story, read by author Stephen Lake. Disclaimer. Hey everyone, I have a quick heads up I want to share with you before we begin. Today's story, unlike in the past, is being read by me, the author. I'm doing the reading this time because I know that none of you really like the AI voices I used before, which is totally fair, and thus I'm giving it a shot myself instead. While what I create may not be perfect, I'd still love to hear what you think, both about the story and the reading. Anyhow, thanks for listening, and now, let's dive in. Penn sat quietly in a meadow in the middle of a vast, sweeping forest and looked up at the stars above. But these weren't the same stars he'd known during his more than a century of life. This sky was different. Gone was the stellar beacon that had once been their northern star, their navigational guide through the night that they'd used during the times when they couldn't rely on their internal navigational systems. He sighed lightly at this, and then turned his attention to the land around him. The meadow he was standing in was tiny in comparison to the vast, sweeping prairies of his former homeworld on Versailles, and surrounded by a thick, unrelenting forest of trees that were stacked back to back in an unending carpet of green which covered the entire continent that they now called home. In fact, this was the nature of the world that they now lived on, as the entire planet was one gigantic forest spread out across 4 continents and surrounded by a vast, surprisingly tranquil sea that divided up the planet into 4 regions, all temperate and, in many ways, not unlike the lands of the former Gorg nation. For the Yigzan and Sadison, this was a dramatic change from the world they'd once known. Despite this, they made do the best they could. The Gorg, on the other hand, unlike the other 2 races, didn't miss a beat. For them, it was as though they'd merely moved from one part of their nation to another, and hadn't instead changed entire planets as they had. Penn again sighed at this. He missed Versailles, and all that it had to offer. Even the bad parts. And while he was glad that the medicine were gone, in some ways he longed for those days. If he could have them again, it meant that he could also go back home to the only planet he ever knew. But alas, such things would not be. Even worse, almost 3/4 of his family were now gone, including Tagani, a fact that stung at him the most sleepily of all. Most of the bad things that had happened to them over the past 10 years were something that he could easily deal with if he had to, so long as Tagani was by his side. But he didn't have that anymore. If anyone had gotten out of this the easy way, it was those they'd left behind. At least they didn't have to deal with the new reality that he now found himself in. And, while he knew he still had work to do for Meshwa, there were days that he questioned his usefulness in achieving that. As he quietly pondered this, he heard a set of footsteps approaching him through the woods from behind. Curious to see who it was, he turned and spotted Brakeman coming his way. "What are you doing here?" he asked in surprise. Brakeman grinned. "Just checking up on you. The others said they hadn't heard from you in a while, so I decided to go to see if you were doing all right," he replied. Penn grinned slightly. "I appreciate your concern, and I am doing very well. But, if I may, I would like to know how you found me." "I didn't tell anyone where I was going," he replied. Brakeman chuckled. "Your tracker is on. It's how I knew where to find you." Penn perked up in curiosity at this and then realized that Brakeman was right. Out of everything he'd done to ensure that he was left alone, he'd forgotten to switch that off. "Ah, I see. Well, then yes, I guess it would be easy for you to find me," he replied. He then turned his attention back to the forest around him and quietly studied it. Brakeman immediately picked up on this. "What's on your mind, bro? You look like something is bothering you," he said. For a moment, Penn neither said anything nor responded to Brakeman's query. After a bit, he looked at the ground and sighed. "I miss our old home, our family, our friends, and everything else we left behind," he replied. Brakeman, upon hearing this, sat down next to Penn on the ground. "If you want to know the truth, I think we all do. We lost a lot of good people that day. Well, not lost, as most of them were with Meshwa, but even so, we still miss them dearly. But yeah, I feel your pain when thinking about that." Said Penn thoughtfully. Brakeman smiled at this. So what do you miss the most about our old homeworld? Well, besides the friends and loved ones we left behind, he asked. Penn pondered this for a bit and then grinned. The wide open spaces, the freedom, mostly. And let me reread that. The wide open spaces and the freedom, mostly. As there are too many trees here for my liking, he replied whimsically, yet with a hint of melancholy. Brakeman laughed at this. I'm with you on that one. This place is far too cluttered and claustrophobic for my tastes. I mean, here we literally have to clear chunks of forest if we want to build anything. Back home, you just staked out a plot of grass, got the grants and zoning, and then started building as soon as you were ready. Well, back at home on Brazil, I mean. Given that this is our new home and our old one is, well, last I heard from Nauru, it's not in very good shape. That brown dwarf really did a number on our former planet when it hit our twin suns and sent them into a white nova. He chuckled slightly at this. And to think we all assumed that the Minizen would be the ones to do us in. Instead, it was a random wandering star that got that honor. And of all the wild surprises life can throw at you, that one's got to be at the top of my list. Penn chuckled at this. It is the same for me, he replied with a light grin. However, the grin soon faded from his face, returning it to its former somberness. Although, if I were to be honest, the one thing I miss the most of our old homeworld is Tagani. His staying behind and not coming with us to this world crushed me more than anything ever has. That is a headache that I have not yet fully recovered from. Brakeman pursed his lips and nodded as he thought about this. Yeah, same with me. I mean, sure, Meshwa said it was okay, but it still hurts to think that we won't see him again until we join him in Tersar. In fact, for a while there, I'd hurt so much that I even asked Meshwa for a few supervised visits. Penn cocked his head and ears curiously at this. You did? And what did he say? Brakeman laughed. He said no, which I should have expected. But he did at least let me know that our brother is doing very well where he's at, and sends his best wishes for us as we continue to serve and protect our people for however much longer we remain here, he replied. Penn thought about this briefly before sighing as he twitched his ears thoughtfully. And that's the big question here, isn't it? How long will we be required to remain in this world? Your son Naru and his children have been here for over a millennia with no signs that things will ever change for them anytime soon. It's amazing that he's able to stay so strong in the face of such great loss. For us, it's only been a few years that we've been without Brazil and Tagani, and we're already wanting to pack it in and go home. And yet he remains firm and solid in his convictions, even after many centuries. Brakeman nodded. Yeah, I'll give him credit for that. He's rock solid dedicated, if nothing else. And while I don't agree with everything he's done, or the way he's done it, you can't argue with the results. Penn pondered this for several moments. No, I don't believe you can. And I think the same could be said of Meshwa, too. What do you mean? Asked Brakeman. Penn looked past his brother briefly before turning his gaze to the sky. Of over 3 billion people that once populated our former homeworld, he only saved about 120 million of them, and a little over 1/4 of our family. Out of everything we came away from this better than our people did, or really anyone else on this planet. It makes me feel bad that we did. Brakeman chuckled at this. So you're upset because we went from a fractional percentage point of the population with 6 zeros behind the decimal point to a slightly better case of 5 zeros behind the decimal point. Penn looked at Brakeman with an upset, almost pouting face. That's not what I meant, and you know it, he replied. Brakeman laughed at this. Bro, we've both known Meshwa for over a century, and there's been plenty of times that he's either done something or allowed it that none of us agree with. I mean, just look at Minizen. Meshwa should have squished him like a bug on day one or even before then, and yet he allowed Minizen to not only live, but also form an entire movement that nearly wiped us out countless times. Why did he allow that? I have no idea, and I really don't think anyone else does, or ever will. He's got his own way of doing things, and even if we may not always agree with him, everything always works out. Penn pondered this for a bit before slowly nodding. That they do, he said somberly. The two then quietly The two then sat quietly on the ground as they each pondered all that had happened in their lives. Eventually Brakeman chuckled and shook his head. Penn cocked an eyebrow at this. "What?" he asked. Brakeman laughed again. "Oh, I'm just thinking about all the crazy stuff that happened to us back on Bersail, the things we went through, your obsession with Tagani, our lives as protectors of the Yixan directly, the world indirectly, the many battles we fought, and so much more," he replied. Penn huffed slightly and then looked away. "I was not obsessed with Tagani," he muttered. Brakeman laughed at this. "Out of everything I mentioned, that was the one thing you cared the most about. Bro, you were every bit obsessed with him from day one." "I was not. I just didn't want to be forced to take his mantle," protested Penn. Brakeman chuckled as he grinned slyly. "Oh, come on, admit it. You were absolutely obsessed with him," he teased. "I was no such thing." Brakeman laughed again and harder, much to the incredulous indignation of Penn. After a bit, however, his laughter faded to muted melancholy. "If truth be told, bro, I think we all were kind of obsessed with him in our own unique ways. He was a great lion, and every last one of us miss him," he eventually replied. Penn nodded at this but said nothing. Brakeman then sat quietly for several more minutes as he pondered this further before grinning slightly. "You know, I find it interesting that after all these years of you worrying about being forced into taking his mantle, it was instead my son who got it." Penn looked up at the stars and smiled at this. "Yes, he did, and in some ways I'm glad for that. While I would prefer that Tagani was still here with us, at least someone has taken his place that both of us can agree was the best choice." Brakeman nodded. "Amen to that. But man, to think that I've got to take orders from my own son, that hurts." Penn laughed at this. "I imagine it would, and yet, despite that, I think it was the best thing that could have happened to us in Tagani's passing," he replied. Brakeman waggled his head thoughtfully at this. "Well, yes and no. No, in the fact that I like being the one in full control, and yes, from the standpoint that he's been really good at keeping us in parts and supplies, especially given how incredibly undeveloped this world is. I mean, without him, we'd all die from lack of maintenance, especially you guys. You've always kept me busy trying to keep you repaired." Penn laughed. Yes, we were very good at that, weren't we?" Brakeman rolled his eyes and snorted. "A little too good, to be honest." Penn snickered at this. "I guess it comes with the job," he replied. Brakeman smiled. "That it does. We also have Naru to thank for letting me keep the Persia. I was afraid he confiscated it as soon as we got here, but apparently it's so old technologically that he has no issues with me keeping it so long as I don't abuse it or do something stupid." Penn thought about this briefly. I almost wonder if he didn't do that more because you're his father and because his brothers spent so much time building it. So it could be that he did that to avoid hurting anyone's feelings, be that yours or his brothers. Brakeman pondered this briefly. "That's entirely possible. Given what little I know about him, it seems to fit with how he thinks, as he is very family-focused. Heck, he even built me a lab to work in, which he didn't have to do, given that he hasn't done that with anyone else on the planet. And just to prove my point, you should see all the dirty looks I get because of that." Penn chuckled. "I imagine you would, especially given that our people are scientists who have been reduced to a pre-industrial state." Brakeman frowned. "Yeah, I know, and I've talked to him about that a few times, but he doesn't seem willing to budge on it. I guess he doesn't want to stir the waters in the galaxy by elevating us above what the other races are facing right now. I mean, yeah, some of them are still industrialized, but the Abernai are absolutely not. So, since our people are Abernai by ancestry, he may be doing that to protect us from the wrath of the others. I mean, what would the other races think if we got to keep our toys and they didn't?" Penn nodded. "That does make sense, as he seems to have a special place in his heart for us." "Agreed. I mean, just look at all the stuff he does for everyone here. Our people have absolutely no sickness, diseases, or illnesses of any kind. He also made sure that our people always have enough to eat, and even helped them get established here quickly with ready-made housing, crops, livestock, and everything else you could ever want in a civilization. And even though he's taken from us a lot of things, He's also made sure we have all we need to survive. Penn nodded. Yes, he has. But that now begs another question. Why would he go so far out of his way to help our people the way he has, considering what he's done to the rest of the galaxy? Brakeman shrugged. Like I said, he's got a soft spot for us in his heart. Penn shook his head. Soft spots I can see, but this feels like it goes above and beyond what one would expect someone like him to do. Brakeman chuckled. Not really. I firmly believe that everything he's done for us so far has been just about right. Penn shook his head. I would have to disagree with you on that. Consider what happened to our family back on Briseil before we came here, or even our people. That leads me to believe that there is more to all of this than we currently see. Brakeman found this curious. How so? He asked. Penn pondered this briefly. Our people are deeply important to Meshwa. That much he's already shown us. But if that's the case, then why did he decide that the work for almost 3/4 of us was over? Brakeman shrugged. Simple mathematics, really. There's less people for us to watch over, so less of us are needed to do that job, he replied. Penn shook his head. I don't think it's as simple as that. The land we're on, the means by which our people now live, is so much more dangerous. Oh, let me go back and reread that. The land we're on and the means by which our people now live is so much more dangerous than it ever was before. They also lack the technology they once had to defend themselves from all harm and danger. Thus, if we are to do our jobs correctly, wouldn't we need to be at full strength even more now than before? And yet, here we are, cut to nearly 1/4 of our original number. If we're still truly needed, why would Meshwa do that? Brakeman lay down on the ground and pondered this in depth. You offer an interesting argument, I'll give you that. But let me ask you a question in return. If we weren't needed anymore, why did Meshwa make sure that we came here? Wouldn't it be better for him to leave us behind as well? I mean, that is, if our work is truly done. Penn thought about this briefly. If we had nothing left to do, then yes, leaving us behind would be the most reasonable thing for him to do. Thus, if we are here, then we still have something to do, even if it's less than what it once was. But that's not my question. My question is, if our job remains as it was, to protect our people, why reduce our numbers as Meshwa has? Wouldn't it be more prudent for him to transfer our entire family here, rather than decreasing it so severely? He asked. Brakeman pondered this briefly. It would be, but that also assumes that the amount of work we still have to do remains the same. If it's become less than before, then our current number is more than sufficient for whatever responsibilities we currently have. I mean, don't get me wrong, we still have a lot to do, but our role these days has become more like what someone who's just here to help everyone adjust to their new homes would do, rather than protecting them from all harm and danger like we once did. That job now seems to have fallen to Naru and the others to carry out. Exactly. And if we're just here to help our people get settled, with Naru taking over their protection, what still remains for us to do? Brakeman perked up at this, as the question he'd just been given intrigued him. Are you suggesting that our time in this world is drawing to a close? He asked after a bit. Penn nodded. That's been a thought on my mind for the past year or so. Said Brakeman as he pondered this. The two then sat quietly as they both mulled this over. Eventually Brakeman turned his attention back to his brother Penn. So are you implying that Meshwa plans to only have us here for as long as we're needed to help our people get settled, after which he'll take us home and put all responsibility for their future in Naru's hands after that? Penn nodded. That's been one thought on my mind. The thing is, it bothers me. How so? Penn sighed. Us leaving our people alone with Naru, while not a bad thing in itself, feels almost neglectful of the duties and responsibilities that Meshwa gave us over a century ago. Brakeman grinned at this. Are you afraid of dying? He asked. Penn frowned. Death is the least of my concerns. Failing at the duty that I was given, however, is not. But if Meshwa eventually says that your duty is complete, how would that be failing? Penn's eyes narrowed. It would be a failure in my eyes if I did not ensure their safety and well-being until all time and space had ceased in their existence. Brakeman laughed at this. Now I see why you always clung to Tagani like you did. Penn looked at his brother in confusion. And what is that supposed to mean? He asked. Penn laughed even more and patted Penn gently on the side. Brother, I think you worry far more than you really need to. Meshwa only created us because he needed us to protect his people for a short time. Once that job is completed, there's nothing else. Then nothing else that happens after that is a failure of duty on our part, as they will no longer be our responsibility. So you don't need to worry yourself over that. Penn frowned. But I want to worry about that. They're our people. Brakeman smiled. Yes, and they belong to Meshwa as well. And since he's a whole lot bigger and stronger than we are, how about we let him worry about the big details, and we merely do what we're asked to until it becomes our turn to leave this world and live with him in Tersar for eternity. Penn pondered this briefly before looking up at the stars and thinking about it a bit longer. Eventually he nodded. Very well, brother. I will do that. And I will also pray that Meshwa does all within his power to ensure that our people are kept safe and well looked after for as long as time and the world remains. Brakeman grinned. Don't worry, I know he will. The end.